for example, finally implemented daylight saving back in '06, residents actually used more electricity. Are you fans of daylight saving?
I hate it. I began to hate it when I had babies, and then young people. It mucks up their sleeping patterns. It can take a good couple of weeks to get them right. And in the summertime, I always feel with those extra hours that I have to be doing something like the lawns or something.
Yeah.
So I end up doing more. So I've not been a fan since the kids.
Okay, Jenny, what about you?
Oh, I like daylight saving. I like those long, drawn-out summer evenings. And yep, I have a couple of kids in their mid-teens, and, you know, teenagers just are dreadful sleepers anyway. Sleep at all the wrong times. But, you know, it's just lovely. It's lovely to get home from work and you've got, you know, 4 or 5 more hours of daylight ahead of you rather than the wintertime when you get home and you just hunker down and waste time. So I'm pro daylight saving.
I'll see if I can change your mind. This is the devil's advocacy against daylight saving. Car accidents, strokes, we know some of this, and heart attacks spike in the days after the time change. A study showed that judges, sleep deprived by daylight saving, impose harsher sentences.
Well, that's good, isn't it?
Not if you're in court next Monday, it's not. Some of the last offenders of daylight saving time in America have been business groups, says the Boston Globe, who assume the change helps stimulate consumer spending. And that is not true either. According to recent analysis of 380 million bank and credit card transactions by JP Morgan Chase, you get a bit more spending in spring, but a whole lot less after the change in autumn.
I know too that the energy saving thing is nonsense, because when you hit the daylight saving hours, particularly now with heat pumps, we're getting far more heat pump use in the summer, so our energy bills are actually going up.
So the only advantage that you can see is the one outlined by Jenny, that you get home and in her case, lots more hours to be out and about.
Yeah.
But in your case, you think, I don't want to mow the lawns.
No.
Daylight turns out to be a surprisingly large factor in how often workers shop at stores on their way home from their jobs in the evening, and what they do when it's darker is go online instead. It really makes a difference, apparently.
So you don't want to go into a shopping car park in the dark and you just want to
Get
scoot
home.
home. Yeah.
You
I can
just want to
understand
get
that.
home.
And all those shopping habits and things have changed a lot since daylight saving was first thought up and put into place. I agree. And you know, energy provisions, there's more heat pumps, there's all those things. But I just don't see what harm it does, except now you've made me think I'm going to have a stroke next week.
Doesn't it upset the cows? Aren't the farmers sort of into it?
Yes.
No,
Well, isn't that
farmers-
why Queensland never had it? Because it
That's
upset the cattle?
Oh,
Yes.
Joe Bielke-Peterson just didn't like it.
Yeah.
The farmers have always grumbled.
Yeah.
Chris Martin, the Coldplay lead singer, is the great-great-grandson of the man who gave us daylight saving. And the opening lyrics of Clocks Go, the lights go out and I can't be saved.
Well, that's a factoid I never knew.
Oh,
That's
that's
just
brilliant.
eerie.
I love that.
Yes, same here. I'm just going to tuck that in my pocket for dinner parties.
Not everybody knows that. Sandy Hodge, thank you.
Thank James.
Despite the lack of the music, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you for your company. And Jenny Morton, you too.
Thank you.
Both come back again soon. Thank you, everybody. That's us for another day. And Wallace Chapman will be with you tomorrow. And John Campbell will be with you very shortly, because Checkpoint is coming up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, a guilty verdict just in the Troy Taylor murder case. This is baby Ihaka in the Christchurch High Court. We'll go there live after the news. Adding toxic lead into petrol at Marsden Point. It stopped more than 20 years ago, but what happened to the workers and to the sludge? A man who raped a sleeping woman in Christchurch, among other convictions, wins his appeal against deportation. The bill to strengthen Wellington's town hall swells to almost $90 million. Theresa May triggers Article 50 and the Brexit journey begins. And how can you really tell if a free-range egg is free-range? Plus, Wellington Zoo's chimps get a mini trampoline and they love it.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A jury at the High Court in Christchurch has just found a man guilty of the assault and murder of the 15-month-old baby boy, Ihaka Stokes. Troy Taylor, who's 23, was accused of assaulting and murdering Ihaka at their home in 2015. Taylor was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. In court, Mr Taylor alleged it was Ms Stokes who inflicted the injuries, but she told the court last week that it was not true. A jury reached its verdict after about 4 hours of deliberations. Airlines say they expect to have cleared most passengers whose flights were disrupted by fog and low cloud by later this evening. Extra flights have been put on where possible, including bringing a large capacity Boeing 777 from a long-haul route to fly people from Wellington to Auckland. Eric Frickberg reports.
Weary, grumbling passengers are finally being moved onto flights, but only after many spent an uncomfortable night bunked down on a hard terminal floor. Both major airlines made clear that accommodation isn't offered when a plane is delayed by weather, and Air New Zealand advised people to take out travel insurance to cover that possibility. The Mayor of Wellington says a fog-bound airport isn't a big enough crisis for the city's welfare centres to be activated. Meanwhile, some passengers were helped out by small Air New Zealand planes using Kapiti Coast Airport instead of Wellington, but they were a lucky minority. This is Eric Frickberg.
Bags of money have fallen out of an armoured security van near Wanaka. The van was driving along the Crown Range Road between Queenstown and Wanaka at about 3:30 this afternoon. A police spokesperson says the back door was open and money was falling out onto the road. They say the number of bags missing and the amount of cash is not known, but someone has handed one bag into a police station. 2 former workers at the Marsden Point refinery near Whangarei say their health has been put at risk from a highly toxic form of lead. They say the alkyl-lead additive was blended with petrol at the refinery, and they believe petrol sludge from the tanks used to mix the substances was dumped on the coast near the refinery. The Northland Regional Council says the dumping may have happened. It says although it found no hydrocarbons in the sand, it didn't test for alkyl leads. A spokesperson for the refinery says when measured in 1995, the lead content met the standards. An advocate for sexual assault victims says a rapist who won his appeal against deportation needs counselling to understand the lasting effects of his offending. Tajinder Paul Singh was jailed for 6 years for the rape of a sleeping woman at a party in Christchurch. The Immigration and Deportation Tribunal ruled he won't be deported unless he reoffends within 5 years because of his wife's poor health and his role as a primary caregiver to his son. Maggie Tai Rakena, the manager of START, a Christchurch-based sexual violence support group, says while Mr Singh is needed by his family, his victim can't be ignored.
When that offender can reappear in their lives and they bump into them out at the mall or something like that, that they can be really set back and go back to feeling like they did on the day when the thing happened. So yeah, it can be quite distressing.
Victims advocate Maggie Tai Rakena. Residents of southeast Queensland are being warned to prepare for more wild weather over the next 12 hours. The former cyclone Debbie is forecast to dump 200 millimetres of rain on Brisbane, more than its average monthly amount. And authorities are warning that in some areas 500 millimetres could fall in 24 hours. The ABC's Andre Withy reports.
Homes, creeks and roads have been swamped from the flash flooding, with more than 1,000 calls for help across southeast Queensland. People have been stranded in flooded cars across the Brisbane region. The Gold Coast hinterland has recorded more than 400 millimetres of rain and many people are sandbagging. Winds of up to 100 kilometres an hour are forecast. Katarina Carroll from Queensland Fire and Emergency Service says residents need to prepare.
We're expecting things to get obviously worse this afternoon and into the evening and throughout the night.
Schools are closed and businesses have been urged to send staff home.
Andre Withy reporting. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. To sport, and Sonny Bill Williams' return to Super Rugby is a little further off than first hoped. The 31-year-old All Black midfielder has been training with the Blues for the past few weeks and had hoped to be back on the field for Saturday's match with the Force in Auckland. Williams ruptured his Achilles while playing for the All Black Sevens at the Rio Olympics. But Williams won't be playing this weekend, although coach Tana Umanga says he's not far off.
I don't think it'll be much longer before he's out on the field, because he's an experienced guy. He knows his body, so probably he's a little bit different from a younger guy that's come back. So who knows? It could be soon.
Tana Umanga. Meanwhile, the Hurricanes will be without injured captain Dane Coles for Saturday's clash with the Reds in Brisbane, and the Chiefs have brought first five Aaron Cruden back into the starting side for Saturday's match against the Bulls in Hamilton, where Liam Messam will play his 150th game for the hosts. Dumped Breakers guard Corey Webster hasn't taken long to find a new club after signing with reigning NBL basketball champions the Perth Wildcats. The Tall Black star parted ways with the Breakers 10 days ago. He's facing assault charges following an incident at an Auckland bar late last year. And the New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko says defending her major title at the ANA Inspiration is more important to her than retaining the world #1 crown. Ko could lose the top spot when she's held since she was 17 to Thailand's Aria Jutanagan if the latter wins this weekend and Ko finishes outside the top 4. That's the news.
Leaving.
The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union.
Not leaving.
We are very unimpressed with Air New Zealand. They offer no assistance in finding hotel rooms. Nobody from the airline has said anything to us at all about compensation. We've been offered a glass of water and a biscuit, and that's it.
Destination listening. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the tertiary sector watchdog on claims institutions are allowing standards to fall in order to retain funding. And after 10, award-winning British historian Catherine Hughes gets up close and personal with horrible bodies in a new book, Victorians Undone. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland mainly fine today, cloudy periods and isolated showers tomorrow. Auckland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape, mostly cloudy with isolated showers. However, long fine breaks during the afternoons and evenings. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. Manawatu to Wellington, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle tomorrow, mostly about the Tararua Range. Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine but cloudy about the Kaikoura coast. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle developing this evening. Fiordland, rain developing later today with heavy falls in the south. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly fine today apart from low cloud or fog about coastal Otago and Canterbury. Scattered rain for Southland tonight, becoming cloudy everywhere tomorrow and scattered rain spreading to Otago. The Chatham Islands overcast with occasional drizzle and fog. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Just want to return to and repeat the news that started that bulletin Katrina's just read. A jury has found Troy Taylor guilty of the assault and murder of 15-month-old Ihaka Stokes. The 23-year-old was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. The jury of 6 men and 6 women retired just before midday and has just come back with that guilty verdict. In fact, 2 guilty verdicts. Our reporter Maya Burry is in the High Court in Christchurch. Obviously strong reactions there. Maya is just waiting to see what is happening, and she will cross live to us the moment she is free from the court. Guilty, Troy Taylor, assault and murder of 15-month-old Ihaka Stokes. It's 5:09. You're with Checkpoint. We begin tonight with the lead that used to be in our petrol and the men whose job was to put it in at Marsden Point. Yesterday, findings were released from the Dunedin study which suggest exhaust fumes from leaded petrol could have been responsible for lowering IQs in children with heavy exposure to lead, leading to lower socioeconomic standing in later life. Lead was removed from petrol in New Zealand in 1996 following a campaign strongly opposed by those making the additives. We will have more on that later. But what few people know is that much of the lead in our petrol was added here in New Zealand, and that at first these highly toxic compounds were added by men working with close exposure to them. That was 50 years ago, and only a tiny number of those men are still alive. But two who have told Checkpoint how very little they knew about the risks from the alkyl leads they were working with. And they've also told us that sludge containing those toxic leads was sometimes dumped near the coast at the edge of the Marsden Point refinery's land. We begin with the lead that went into our petrol.
The lead was added to the petrol blend at Marsden Point refinery.
This is Brian Arndt. He remembers it forensically, the highly toxic compounds he and many others handled for a living.
By way of coming in drums of 205 litres, weighing approximately 360 kilos each, that were manually emptied into the blending vessels, being one for tetraethyl lead and one for tetramethyl lead, through a induction vacuum-operated process.
Right, now that sounds very complex, and you've converted to metric for me, which is very kind of you, but we're talking about 44-gallon drums here, aren't we?
Correct.
So the lead, tetraethyl lead and tetramethyl lead, TEL and TML, was imported into New Zealand?
Yes, by ship and unloaded at Marsden Point Harbourboard Wharf, and then trucked into the refinery compound and then put into the lead compound.
In other words, this was a mixture put together at Marsden Point, and tetraethyl lead and tetramethyl lead, highly toxic organolead compounds, were added on site by the workers themselves. Did you ever do that work?
Yes, I did. I did it frequently, a minimum of 3 to 4 shifts per month of at least 7 hours.
That was Brian Arndt. And this is Brian Tobin, another former Marsden Point man.
I would go down and roll up 50-gallon drums, put them on a stand ready for the guys to educt the lead out.
It was tough work, shift work, the alkyl leads coming into the port, off the ship and into the refinery. Toxic, man-made, added to petrol to reduce what was called knock in combustion engines, brought in drum by drum.
And they were heavy, man, they were heavy.
And this was with the TEL and the TML in them, so the
Correct.
lead that was added to the petrol.
That's the stuff, yep.
And by the time Brian and dozens of other men were doing this, the risk was explicitly known. March 13, 1964, a letter from E. Simpson, Medical Officer of Health, to the Whangarei District Officer of the Department of Labour. It's heading tetraethyl, tetramethyl lead, and it says...
There is, at the Marsden Point oil refinery, a section of the plant wherein employees will be handling one or both of these compounds. Both are extremely toxic. The risk is present wherever the compounds are handled.
Extremely toxic. And how were Brian Arndt and his workmates mixing TEL and TML into the petrol formula?
We removed an outer cap by we placed the drum on a roller bed, turned the drum so the cap was uppermost, removed the cap and removed an internal plug, and then you were within 60 centimetres of the surface of the lead inside the drum.
So you had taken the cap off and the drum was open to you at that point. Could you smell the lead?
Yes, you could. Even though you had an air mask on, you could smell it. And we just had plain white overalls and, if they were available, a pair of underpants to wear underneath them and a sweatshirt in the winter.
Brian started at Marsden Point in April 1965. That's 13 months after that letter from the Medical Officer of Health about the two compounds that were being added to the petrol there. You were doing that work, right?
Correct, yes.
The letter goes on to say both are extremely toxic. Did anyone ever tell you that?
We were given no induction training outlining the risks or procedures, or in the case of spillage, what to do. There was no training given with this product. We were not aware of any dangers.
But by 1965, the risk was known. The letter goes on to say the risk is present wherever the compounds are handled.
We were never told this. Never.
Brian Tobin, that's our other Brian, remembers being told something.
We were told it was nasty stuff. We weren't told just how nasty it was, but, we should wear the protective clothing.
And again, the protective clothing was overalls, underpants, and Brian Tobin remembers, although Brian Arndt says he never wore one, a kind of breathing apparatus, although by this stage it was known organic lead compounds passed freely through the skin. Brian Tobin was told they'd all be tested to make sure they were okay.
Anyone that worked down there was supposed to have blood tests for lead. I didn't work down there as much as a lot of people, but I never had a blood test.
And what of the sludge that is the inevitable byproduct of such work? In September 1988, a waste management guide on, quote, the treatment and disposal of lead petrol sources by the Department of Health said,
For many years, highly toxic lead alkyl compounds have been added to petrol in New Zealand. The sludge and scale removed from the tanks is also hazardous due to the presence of toxic lead compounds.
Where did it go at Marsden Point? Where was the sludge taken?
Into the bottom southeast corner of the refinery compound, and an aerial photo which I have clearly shows the lead dump adjacent to the beach.
And was it, when you say dump, what happened to it? Was it buried? Was it put in containers? How was it disposed of?
Just put on the ground. Just put there in a bit of a hollow between a couple of sandhills. Just put there.
That was Brian Arndt. I asked Brian Tobin the same question. What happened to the sludge?
Out of the gasoline tanks.
Yeah, with the lead, with the TEL and the TML in it.
Oh, that went to a sludge dumps over by the corner on that road that goes down to the beach, southeast corner.
And was there any special bunkers there? Had concrete or anything been put in as some kind of storage facility as far as you know, or was there just sand there?
Just sand.
We called the Northland Regional Council. Colin Dahl is Group Manager, Regulatory Services.
There's a possibility that historically there may have been some sludge dumped on site at the refinery.
Do you know, have you asked the Marsden Point Refinery, has the Northland Regional Council made inquiries as to whether this happened?
We've spoken with the refinery and the refinery can't rule out the possibility that some sludge may have been disposed of at site. They had some historic areas where they did dispose of waste.
Is this good enough? And how long has the Northland Regional Council known about it before? Because these products are so toxic that they were actually banned from petrol. It seems, and you certainly can't deny the fact, that they were dumped into sand on the coast in Whangarei or near Whangarei, right on the property of the Marsden Point Refinery.
Right.
Is that good enough?
Well, we're talking about practices that were taking place some 20 years ago, and of course today that wouldn't happen.
And these are indeed historical practices. Lead has not been added to petrol in New Zealand since 1996, 21 years ago. But what of that era remains?
So the monitoring programs have been in place for a long time, and to date, as I've noted, we haven't picked up concerns about lead levels. There is a groundwater monitoring program at the refinery. We've got a number of monitoring wells around the around the site, and we certainly currently test for hydrocarbon levels in the groundwater.
These aren't hydrocarbons, though. We're not talking about hydrocarbons here, are we?
Sure.
We're talking about organoleds, right?
Yeah, and one thing we could look at is to start including some sampling for organoled.
So are you not? So when you say that there's no evidence of lead there, are you not sampling for organoleds currently?
Not specifically for organoled in the groundwater.
And the workers, what, if anything, remains in them? Well, Brian Tobin is pretty healthy. Brian Arndt is a wreck. When we spoke, he listed one by one the ailments he suffered from.
In the 1980s, I started getting squamous carcinomas, which is now positively attributed to the toxic effect of tetraethyl lead in particular passing through the skin. I also then, in the late 80s, became aware of a heartache or ache around my heart and the left lung, and there was a large tumour removed from my left lung. In 2009, I was diagnosed with a oddball tumour in my right breast. I had a complete mastectomy. And then early 2012, I had radical radiation and hormonal treatment on my prostate. I had a tumour that was 57 millimetres big. I then discovered a tumour growing in my left breast, and that was removed. In 2013, my oncologist sat down with me and said a peer review had been done by his colleagues. They couldn't figure out why I had all these cancers and problems. I ran through my work history of life, and when I got to working at the refinery, he said, no, not hydrocarbon, different cancer. When I said tetraethyl lead, he said, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me.
It's difficult to know, of course, and harder to prove the cause and effect. But Brian is 77 now, and the colleagues he's worked most closely with are all dead. And there are days the lead and what it might have done to him and his mates weighs on him very heavily. His mates all gone now.
Just me, the last one. And I wonder how much longer I'm going to live.
And he thinks of the warning letters they never saw, and the simple overalls they wore, and opening the tanks to get the alkyl leads out.
If I took a drum of that lead into their offices now and opened it, they would throw a fit. I'd be called a terrorist. I'm sorry.
Brian Arndt, who used to work with the toxic lead substances at Marsden Point. We first approached Refining New Zealand yesterday for a response to the story we were working on. It declined to be interviewed, but its communication manager, Greg McNeil, sent us a statement. He said it had no records of lead sludge being disposed at the refinery's Mere Road site in Ruakaka. It said testing of the soil and water showed no signs of contamination, and precautionary testing around the former lead plant, which was decommissioned in 1996, was carried out 2 years ago and did not trigger any concerns. The refinery says it's always acted in accordance with the medical guidelines for the handling of lead and carried out regular medical checks for anyone involved in the handling of lead on site. It says it has evidence of workers wearing the appropriate personal protection when the lead plant was decommissioned, and that access to the plant was always restricted. Today we went back to Mr McNeil of Refining New Zealand. We wanted clarification of what was tested for and when it was tested for. Given that lead was banned in 1996, what happened to the tanks that had been used prior to that period? Still no to an interview, but a revised statement. Mr McNeil says Refining New Zealand knows of a past land farm in that particular area. He says land farming remains a consented, environmentally sustainable practice to return contaminated soil, including sludge, to an acceptable quality for land use. When last measured in 1995, the total lead content of the lead farm was 33 parts per million, well below the national environmental standard for safer residential use. Given the result was so low and leaded activity had ceased, no further monitoring of the land farm has taken place in later years. We think that means it's been none since 1995. Mr McNeil says if new information was made available, the refinery would readily carry out further testing. 5:22 you're with Checkpoint and RNZ. A jury has found Troy Taylor guilty of the assault and murder of 15-month-old Ihaka Stokes. The 23-year-old was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. The jury of 6 men and 6 women retired just before midday and has come back with a verdict. Our reporter Maya Burry is at the High Court in Christchurch. Maya, the jury took well under 5 hours to reach a verdict. How did the court react?
That's right, John. Gasps rang out across the public gallery as the verdict was read. Mr. Taylor was standing in the dock. He looked shocked with this verdict. And outside the court a short time ago, Cameron Allen, who is the boy Ihaka Stokes' biological father, when asked for comment on the verdict, all he said was, good job. But yeah, obviously a lot of shock here today. Good shock, I guess, for Michaela Stokes, finally knowing that the court has found Troy Taylor, her ex-partner, guilty of murdering her son.
Reasonable doubt, of course, is the defence that the defence run here, and Troy Taylor himself said he was trying to protect Ihaka's mum, Michaela. What has been the reaction of Mr. Taylor's defence team?
Mr. Taylor's defence team had nothing to say as they left court today. Obviously not the outcome they were hoping for, but the defence's case throughout this trial has been that Michaela Stokes was responsible for Ihaka's death. They allege that Ms. Stokes, who was alone with Ihaka for 3.5 hours in the afternoon to evening on the day Ihaka died, was the one that had inflicted some of the 59 injuries that Ihaka was found to have suffered in a post-mortem examination. They allege that Ms. Stokes was responsible, but obviously this jury has found that actually it was in fact Troy Taylor who committed this murder.
And that news in just before 5 o'clock. Thank you. Maya is at the court. She's going to go and speak to people for the reactions. The jury back pretty quickly. They went out at lunchtime back well before 5 with guilty on both counts. Troy Taylor guilty of the assault and murder of 15-month-old Ihaka Stokes. That from the High Court in Christchurch. A man who raped a sleeping woman at a party has won his appeal to stay in New Zealand, a decision that has outraged some who say he should be deported back to India immediately. Tajinder Paul Singh was 29 when he was jailed for 6 years for the rape at a neighbour's party in Christchurch. He has a range of other convictions, including for drink driving and passport fraud. But the Immigration and Protection Tribunal has ruled Mr Singh can stay in New Zealand because his wife is unwell and he is his son's primary caregiver. Jessie Chang has the story.
Tajinder Paul Singh has lived in New Zealand as a permanent resident for more than 9 years. In addition to the rape, he has convictions for drink driving, passport fraud, dangerous driving and failing to stop after an accident. Despite these offences, the Immigration and Protection Tribunal has ruled Mr Singh will be allowed to stay in the country, provided he doesn't commit an offence that would see him jailed during the next 5 years. In a decision made last September that has just been released, the tribunal says Mr Singh is the primary caregiver to his son, since his wife, a New Zealand citizen, suffers from depression and anxiety and can't care for him. The New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says Mr Singh is clearly a dangerous person and shouldn't have been allowed in the country in the first place.
This person had a serious record. Then he pleads before the court humanitarian reasons. Let's be honest, that wife and that kid would be better off without him.
A sexual violence support group says the ruling could be traumatic for Mr Singh's victim, and her well-being should be considered as well. Maggie Tairakina, the manager of the Christchurch-based Start, says Mr Singh needs to understand the harm he's caused.
When that offender can reappear in their lives and they bump into them out at the mall or something like that, that they can be really set back and go back to feeling like they did on the day when the thing happened. So yeah, it can be quite distressing.
However, Ms Tairakina says if Mr Singh undertakes serious counselling and shows true remorse for his actions, his family circumstances are a valid reason for him to stay. An immigration lawyer, Stuart Daly, says Mr Singh's wife and son obviously need him, and it isn't fair to characterise the tribunal ruling as soft.
In other cases, the tribunal has the power to cancel a person's liability for deportation, which would mean that they're allowed to remain unaffected in New Zealand. But in this case, the tribunal took the step that they suspended the person's liability.
And Stuart Daly says Mr Singh's appeal was the only successful one of 3 deportation cases involving rape in the same month. A spokesperson for Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse says he can't comment on specific cases, but he believes New Zealand's deportation systems are robust. For Checkpoint, Ko Jessie Chang, Aho.
The bill to strengthen Wellington's historic town hall has swelled to almost $19 million. The town hall was listed as earthquake-prone in 2009 and closed for strengthening 3 years later, 2012. However, in that time, the costs have almost tripled from an initial estimate of $32 million to the $89.5 million being presented to Council next week. Michael Crops, our local government reporter in Wellington. His story begins with the city's mayor, Justin Lester.
It was here on the site in 1900 where the city's leaders decided they wanted to build the town hall, and for £68,000 it was completed in 1904, which seems like these days a trifling sum.
Justin Lester says the town hall's his favourite building in the city and he's keen to see it strengthened and reopened. To bring it up to 100% of the new building standard, the work includes installing base isolators, digging a new basement and strengthening internal and external walls. That, says Mr Lester, is what the city must pay for if it's going to have the building for future generations.
I am confirming today that we will be taking a plan to council next week around restoring the town hall to its former glory. We want to make sure that this building has a future in the city, not just for the next 100 years, hopefully longer.
Once completed in 2021, the building could become the basis of a civic music hub. The council's working with Victoria University and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, who are expected to become long-term tenants in the building. Mr Lester says they will pay for their share of the fit-out and negotiations should be finalised by June. Iona Pannett, a councillor and a vocal heritage advocate, says it's a special building, and when the music hub takes off, it'll be a real addition to the area.
It's fantastic to see that there's a new action plan to make sure it's strengthened. It is going to. It's obviously a quite expensive one, but it has to be done. It can't be demolished, and it's going to be an asset for Wellington for the next couple of 100 years.
There have been rumours that the building, which was opened in 1904, has been haunted for years. After the Mayor's announcement, council staff members were sharing stories, with one talking about a famous video of a knife spinning by itself. Over the years, some staff have been too scared to enter the building, they say, and one of the council's project leaders admits she doesn't like being there by herself. The project's manager, Bede Cristani, says the strengthening work will make the building 7 times stronger than it was after the strengthening work done in the 1990s.
We're doing geotech testing, so we've got a bunch of assumptions for the ground conditions. So now we're actually drilling and carrying out about 3 different types of tests to test that our assumptions are right or wrong, positive or negative, and that helps us get defined on our design.
The council is set to make its final decision on the plan in late June and is seeking the community's input in the meantime. For Checkpoint, Michael Cropderne.
We're going to stay in Wellington just before the headlines, not long, but it's worth it. Some magic from Wellington Zoo. A chimpanzee keeper there moved house recently and realised she had no use for a small rebounder trampoline, so she brought it to work. Inside the chimp enclosure it went, and it turned out to be a huge hit. Staff recorded the chimps playing, and so far the video's racked up more than 10,000 views on Facebook since they posted it yesterday. Wellington Zoo's primates team leader, Harmony Wallace, told our reporter Zach Fleming it may now go into the regular cycle of play toys.
When it first got put in there, the youngest chimp we've got here, Kitway, he's 2. He is the one in the video. He obviously found it pretty interesting and pretty playful. And for him, a new experience. They're used to the hammocks and stuff that they can jump on, but this felt quite different and looked different. So for him, it was a cool, fun thing to be able to play with. And then our alpha male, Alexi, is the bigger one in the video, along with Kitway's mum. And, being the alpha, he wanted to make sure that Kitway was going to stay nice and safe. And he's also really playful, so he saw that Kitway was enjoying it and getting a lot of play out of it, and so he wanted to go and take part as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of ironic that a 2-year-old had a go before the alpha male. The smaller they are, I guess, kind of the less fear they have almost, as long as mum feels it safe, and they know that, also we're not going to put anything in there that is really unsafe for them, so they know that it's a safe environment for them. So, yeah, he's a bit braver because he hasn't got that, I guess, that fear, that response to step back a bit and take it easy first. Did they figure out how to bounce on it like a human would?
No, I mean, for a chimp they don't really bounce as such, but he could feel that it was springing underneath him, and so he would, I guess, push down on it to see what sort of resistance he would get, and that it would spring back up to him. But no, they don't use it really to jump like people do.
Now, if you're in your car or you're in the kitchen and you're listening on the radio, do have a look at that footage. It is absolutely life-affirmingly delightful. It's on our Facebook page and, of course, on Wellington Zoo's Facebook page. Here with the 5:33 headlines is Katrina Batten.
A jury has found Troy Taylor guilty of assault and murder of 15-month-old Ihaka Stokes. The 23-year-old was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. A jury deliberated at the High Court in Christchurch for about 4 hours before delivering the verdict. Airlines expect to have cleared most passengers delayed in Wellington by fog later this evening. They've been putting on extra flights where possible. The disruption to flights left stranded passengers sleeping on a hard terminal floor last night after both major airlines made clear accommodation was not on offer. 2 former workers at the Marsden Point refinery near Whangarei say their health has been put at risk from a highly toxic form of lead. They say the alkyl-lead additive was blended with petrol at the refinery, and they believe the petrol sludge was dumped on the coast near the refinery. A spokesperson for the refinery says when measured in 1995, the lead content of the sludge met standards. Bags of money fell out of an armoured security van travelling along the Crown Range Road near Wanaka this afternoon. The police say the back door was open and money fell out onto the road. They say the number of bags missing and amount of cash are not known, but one bag has been handed in. Heavy rain is wreaking havoc across Queensland today as the remnants of ex-tropical cyclone Debbie move through the southeast. Swift water rescues are underway in the state's north, while residents in the southeast are desperately filling sandbags. Hundreds of schools and businesses have closed. A federal judge in the American state of Hawaii has extended the suspension of the president's travel ban for an indefinite period. The ruling means Donald Trump will be barred from enforcing his revised travel ban while it's contested in court. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who's back with us in the Auckland studio. Insurer Tower is looking to shore up its financial position as it deals with 2 rival takeover bids. This is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so this has been going on for a while.
A long time,
yeah. And so they got an offer from a Canadian outfit called Fairfax, offering $1.17. And, well, that was a pretty good offer at the time.
What was the share?
From memory, it's about like 80 cents or something. It was quite,
it was
really,
a real premium to market value at the time.
It really was. Well, Tower had been going through some difficult times because of the ongoing claims, out of Christchurch. So they had decided they would restructure their business and move that part of the business that's dealing with the Canterbury claims into a separate kind of company. Now, that never really happened. They never did separate the businesses because they got this offer from the Canadian firm. But not long later, it got another offer, and this time from Suncorp, and that's the Australian mob that owns Vero.
Right. Now, on the face of it, these were good offers, but an insider's told me that they didn't reflect Tower's true long-term value.
Well, actually, that I don't know.
Right, well, yes, because the insider told me, not you.
I don't know that. But I do know that today they had their annual meeting. That is, Tower had the annual meeting. And the chair was a little uncomfortable talking to the shareholders about these takeover offers because one of them, the one from Suncorp, sort of, well, they didn't break any laws according to what the chair of Tower was saying, but he said it was abhorrent what happened there.
Right.
Because
who is the chair?
The chair is a guy named Michael Stiasny
from Portamentha. Yeah,
yes,
right.
That's
okay.
right. So the chair said basically that the offer that Suncorp is making to the shareholders, that hasn't actually been formally proposed yet, is $1.30. But what they did was they paid $1.40 a share to get themselves up to the 20% mark. Now, some shareholders were like, well, what's the price? Is it $1.30? Is it $1.40? And, the chair said, we're not really sure what's going on
so
with that.
So where does Tower's shareholders
Well,
stand?
Tower's expecting some difficulty. And so it's saying we're going to have to shore up our balance sheet to protect the company while it goes through this, what is probably going to be a difficult period of dueling takeover offers. Anyway, so the share price fell 3% today to $1.26. That's a 4-cent fall. That's still, $1.26. That's higher than the Canadian offer, but less than what Suncorp might be offering. We'll see what happens.
Fascinating story, that one.
Yeah. So the NZX Top 50 Index, it added 36 points today. That's 0.5% to 7,169. And the New Zealand dollar is steady at 70.3 US cents. 91.7, and that Brexit vote the Brexit exit didn't do very much, 56.5 pence.
Thanks, Nona. We're going to look at that in a bit more detail later on. Thanks so much, Nona Peltier, our Auckland business reporter, joining us in the studio here. Airlines have spent today clearing a backlog of passengers stranded in fog-stricken Wellington after a day of chaos. Late this afternoon, people were finally catching their flights and fraying tempers were improving. It was a long old wait for some. Eric Frickberg reports.
Passengers stranded for a night in a crowded airport were in some cases stoical, in others angry, and in some cases upset.
We had to wait a long time to reschedule. The accommodation that was available in the end was over $600 a night.
They said that they can't do nothing.
We knew there was chaos, but we had no idea what's going on.
Some people had nowhere to go unless they paid for accommodation themselves, which sometimes couldn't be found even if they were willing to pay the bill, which was sometimes large. For many, bed last night was the hard floor of an airport terminal. The Mayor of Wellington, Justin Lester, at first raised the possibility that the city's welfare centres could be available for a crisis. But he then said Wellington's fog-bound airport wasn't a big enough crisis to clear the hurdle.
Our welfare centres are there for situations of emergency. It's not an emergency when you've only had fog that's been there for a day. It's a situation that's unfortunate. No one wants to be in that position, of course, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that there's a threshold that's crossed.
The airlines were unsympathetic, saying passengers needed to make their own arrangements. Air New Zealand said rebooking or refunding was available when flights were cancelled for reasons within its control, such as engineering issues. For weather-related problems, though, customers should consult the conditions on their tickets, and it urged them to take out travel insurance as protection. Jetstar said it aims to get passengers to their destination by the next available flight during weather disruption, but it says it can provide overnight accommodation for disruptions within its control, such as engineering issues. The Chief Executive of Tourism Industry Aotearoa, Chris Roberts, says travel disruption in New Zealand sometimes can't be helped.
Obviously, New Zealand has pretty volatile weather, and all of our airports are subject to disruption from time to time. It's just a fact of life. The airports and the airlines can only do their very best to cope in those situations, and hopefully it hasn't disrupted people's enjoyment of their visits too much.
More than 100 flights were cancelled yesterday by fog, and flights resumed this morning. To help clear the backlog, Air New Zealand put on a large-capacity Boeing 777 to take delayed people from Wellington to Auckland. Some flights were diverted to Palmerston North. The Chief Executive of Kapiti Coast Airport, Robert Binney, says his airport was able to take in some passengers headed for the capital in smaller Air New Zealand planes.
Kapiti Coast Airport was able to accommodate 7 diverted passenger service aircraft. The largest was a Dash 8 Q300 Bombardier, operated by Air New Zealand. That carries up to 50 passengers. Other aircraft diverted included smaller ones ranging from 6 and 12-seat aircraft.
Meteorologists say this type of weather pattern will bring fog to the capital about 6 times a year. Meanwhile, civil aviation laws say pilots can't land unless they can see Wellington runway from an altitude of 450 feet. This is for safety reasons, even though big modern planes can land on instrumentation alone if needed. For Checkpoint, Core Eric Frickberg-Tene.
We've got some breaking news. Police are appealing for witnesses after an Auckland schoolboy was grabbed and forced into his car on the way to school yesterday. The police have just come out with this. North Shore Police say the 14-year-old boy was walking along Lancaster Road in the Auckland suburb of Beach Haven about 8 a.m. when he was approached by a man and forced into the car. The boy managed to fight the man off. The offender is described, and this is a very explicit description, as being in his 60s, with a dragon tattoo across his face. A dragon tattoo across his face. The North Shore yesterday morning. To Australia now, where flash flooding has hit southeast Queensland as ex-tropical cyclone Debbie is lashing the coast. Torrential rain wreaking havoc. More than 1,500 schools and many businesses closed in Brisbane and elsewhere along the southeast coast, with as much as 250 mils of rain expected just this afternoon. Emergency crews called to dozens of rescues as the town of Homebush near Mackay was inundated overnight. The ABC's Nance Haxton reports.
The situation is evolving so quickly, emergency services are struggling to confirm numbers of people who need their help. Katarina Carroll is the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services Commissioner. She says swift water rescue crews are helping people evacuate Eaton and Homebush west of Mackay.
We have some 12 incidents currently taking place that we have got crews on the ground. The weather is continuing in that area up there, so I ask people who are in this situation, please be patient. We are definitely getting to you.
Ex-cyclone Debbie is now causing havoc in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. Ian Stewart is Queensland's Police Commissioner.
Debbie's got a sting in the tail, and it's going to affect all of Queensland and potentially into New South Wales. Please heed our warnings. Take appropriate action now.
All schools south of Agnes Water are closed, and in Brisbane, non-essential public servants have been sent home.
Do not underestimate the power and the potential of this rainfall, this soaking rain. We are getting reports now from the Bureau with predictions of anywhere between 16 and 20 inches of rain falling down here in the southeast during this afternoon, with potentials for 4 inches within 1 to 3 hours very late into the night. Put that on top of 4 to 8 inches between now and then, right across Queensland and the path of this low, we have got a very, very challenging situation and dangerous situation.
Emergency services are stretched throughout the state. 40 councils are pooling their resources to deal with the disaster. Deputy Police Commissioner Steve Golszewski says they're evacuating the Whitsunday Islands today.
Obviously, we're still very challenged in that area with power outages. We've had pressures on our water supply up there. We've been able to access and send in additional generation and equipment and technicians to make sure the water is back online. We're very confident we have that.
And he too is urging people in Queensland's southeast not to underestimate the coming deluge.
You need to make sure that this afternoon you go home early, your children are home safe and tucked up early, because as we get into the evening tonight, it's going to get quite nasty or nastier, and we don't need people out and about there where there's going to be lots of water.
Bureau of Meteorology forecaster Matt Bass says ex-cyclone Debbie is moving quicker than they had predicted, with areas in the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast hinterland expecting falls of up to 400 millimetres before midnight tonight.
Our latest guidance has the system tracking a little bit quicker than we were looking yesterday, so it does look like the heavy rainfall might actually clear Brisbane around about midnight or maybe just soon after midnight in the very early hours of tomorrow morning.
It's Australian weather forecaster Matt Bass ending that report from the ABC. There's no turning back now. That was the message today from British Prime Minister Theresa May, who pulled the pin on the Brexit process with a simple one-page letter that was hand-delivered to Brussels. It was the culmination of the controversial British vote to leave the EU some 9 months ago and the beginning of a whole lot more work. This report from the BBC.
Some moments make us. This is one. The minute in Westminster, Belfast, Edinburgh and Cardiff that the United Kingdom formally changed course.
The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union. This is an historic moment from which there can be no turning back.
Probably our last ambassador to the European Union, handing over the letter at 12:25. The document that says we're on our way out. Theresa May's signature on our departure. Her job now to make it work. This, her hope.
A country that goes out into the world to build relationships with old friends and new allies alike. And that is why I have set out a clear and ambitious plan for the negotiations ahead. It is a plan for a new, deep and special partnership between Britain and the European Union.
In perhaps the most important letter she'll ever pen, the Prime Minister wrote of her hope to give reassurance quickly to the millions of EU citizens who live here and Brits abroad. We should always put our citizens first. We should aim to strike an early agreement about their rights, but no guarantees. The Prime Minister wants a free trade deal with the EU of greater scope and ambition than any before. A bold hope, seen as naive by some, to try to protect firms who do business around the continent from new rules and barriers. There was no overt threat to walk away, but a serious warning. A failure to reach agreement would mean our cooperation in the fight against crime and terrorism would be weakened. Her message, the EU needs us. Labour aren't the only ones sceptical she can deliver.
If the Prime Minister can deliver a deal that meets our tests, that'll be fine, we'll back her. More than ever, Britain needs a government that will deliver for the whole country, not just a few. And that is the ultimate test of the Brexit deal that the Prime Minister must now secure.
The clock is ticking now.
Memories of today will be so different. A public party for some.
All right, Boris, I'm going to vote Brexit.
Even though that's not actually the Foreign Secretary.
Everyone unite as brothers.
Almost awake for others. That's the sense in the home of the EU.
There is no reason to pretend that this is a happy day, neither in Brussels nor in London.
In a rare interview inside Number 10, the Prime Minister promised, despite all the challenges, our relationship with the rest of the continent will be just as good.
What we're both looking for is that comprehensive free trade agreement which gives that ability to trade freely into the European single market and for them to trade with us. It will be a different relationship, but I think it can have the same benefits in terms of that free access to trade.
An assertion that will take a lot to prove, one her counterparts in Europe struggle to believe. But Number 10's time for preparation is up. Now time to try to persuade.
Laura Koonsberg from the BBC with that report. It's 11 to 6. An Auckland supermarket owner says he's taken eggs from cage suppliers off his shelves because it's the only way to determine if an egg is truly free range. This week, Countdown pledged to stop selling caged eggs across all its stores, but by 2025. Adrian Buckler, who owns New World in the suburb of Remuera, says his store has been free range for the past year because his customers kept coming in and demanding it.
Yeah, just continually, all the time. Why have you got these caged eggs in here and all that? And at first you thought, you can't do it, but really it's a feel the fear and do it thing. You know, you just have to have a go. Yes, we got a few people saying, why are there no cheaper caged eggs as well? But it's not that, it's so few, it's not even funny.
And we need to acknowledge that if you were going to look for a constituency who was able to afford free-range eggs, then Remuera is a good place to start, right?
Well, it's a good place to start, but I wish I could say I was the first, but Carterton and Dannevirke beat me, so, I mean, they are not the Remueras of New Zealand. And
right, so Carterton in the Wairarapa, and Dannevirke, I guess, is what, the southern Hawke's Bay, I suppose. And so they are, on the face of it, less well-heeled areas, aren't they?
And they've been, I think, about 5 or 6 years cage-free.
How do you know you're getting free-range eggs? Because this is, and I know you don't want to talk about Countdown because you don't, you compete with them, but...
Who are they? Who are those?
Yeah, okay, fair point. But how are you absolutely certain the eggs you are told are free-range are free-range?
Look, John, it's like anything, you can't be 100% sure, but what you do, you deal with people that you hope have integrity. I mean, it's all down to integrity. The suppliers that we have, you feel they're telling the truth. And if they say they're free range, I believe them. And we have had people check some other operations that are our suppliers, and they are free range. I mean, it's all down to integrity. If you're going to deal with people that are a bit dodgy, well, you don't trust them.
Yeah, and I guess when you're purchasing food, this is across the board, isn't it? I mean, if you're purchasing stuff that's called organic, I suppose, well, you can run checks on that. But the point is that you lose economies of scale here, don't you? So you are purchasing individually as a franchise owner, right? Yes. Whereas the most efficient and cost-effective model is to have head office purchasing in bulk. You can't do that. If you have to go to your suppliers, you have to do that yourself.
Yes.
And that's worth doing. And your customers want it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people want to know where their food comes from these days. The world's changing. I mean, there's a lot of dodgy people out there doing a lot of dodgy things. And we're just lucky being a cooperative that we can individually tailor our store to suit the demographics. So, yeah. I mean, the wider business is always looking at how we can do even more than what we're already doing. So, for example, Pam's, which is our cooperative brand...
Your house brand?
Yes, has been 100% cage-free since 2008. So, and we need to work closely with suppliers, which is what we've been doing, and we'll continue to do so.
And then we start to look at caged pork. Are you selling that?
We do Freedom Farms pork only. We don't. We don't do it.
That is Adrian Buckler, who owns the New World franchise in the suburb of Remuera. Let's travel across the oceans. It's arguably the jewel of the Cook Islands tourism industry, but algae has been spreading in Rarotonga's once pristine Muri Lagoon, and consultants have been hired to find a way to salvage the sick waterway, but as many say, it's too little too late. RNZ International Sally Round has been in Rarotonga and filed this report.
Late afternoon at Muri Lagoon. It's hot and the water's still. People are lolling in the shallows and lounging on the beach. Richard Smith, a tourist who's just arrived on Rarotonga, has no idea the lagoon is in trouble.
It's sheltered and you can snorkel right off the beach. This is perfect for us.
It was also news to another visitor, Hamish Whistler, who's just been out snorkeling.
It does look like it used to be a lot better, but you can see a bit of the bleaching and that and dead coral floating around. I was hoping to be better than this, but it wasn't bad.
Graham Taylor, who lives near Muri and regularly walks his dog there, says it's far from the pristine place it once was.
There's a smell about it sometimes. If you dig deep into the sand, there's sludge down the bottom. Blue sand, never seen blue sand before. There's a big problem here and they've got to do something about it.
Kelvin Passfield of the environmental group Te Pukarea Society says it's not deemed a health risk, but he prefers to swim elsewhere.
I'd say it's very close to dying. If you go for a snorkel out there and look at the coral heads, there's a few small areas where there's still live coral. So much of it is just dead now, and a recent bleaching event, we've just had a coral bleaching event here as well, which hasn't helped.
The Asian Development Bank noted the pollution back in 2009 and warned then of the risk to the critical tourism industry. A traditional leader near Muri, Philip Nicholas, says his people and fishing are affected too. He says drastic actions needed now.
If we can get in there and remove all that sand, dredge that sand out, we should see an immediate improvement in the flushing of the whole lagoon.
Kelvin Passfield says dredging is a short-term solution.
One of the issues is that there's still being approvals given for more resorts and hotel developments on the coast, and that's just going to exacerbate the problem as well. The more nutrients going in is just going to make it worse, and they should be looking very closely at restricting more hotels going up.
Over the last fortnight, the seaweed is reported to have died off a bit because of plenty of rain. The CEO of the Cook Islands Tourism Corporation, Halatoa Fua, is optimistic, citing a new cohesive approach to dealing with the bloom and consultants being engaged to report back within 18 months.
It's one of the most photographed and visited sites in the Cook Islands, especially for visitors. But now that we've seen a lot of that disappearing, it's quite pleasing for us, but it doesn't mean that we rest on our laurels. There still needs to be a lot of work to be done for sanitation management here in the Cook Islands.
Back on the shore of Muri Lagoon, Canadian tourists Richard Smith and Barbara Gibson suggest tourists could be part of the solution.
But we'd be happy, I think, to pay some sort of environmental cleanup tax, and if that money went to it, then I think every tourist would be happy to contribute to that.
Cabinet Minister Mark Brown says fixing up the lagoon is a priority and dredging work is likely once environmental consents are achieved. For Checkpoint, Sally Round.
Lovely story, Sally. Thank you. You probably did it when you were little, and if you have kids, you've probably encouraged them to do it. I'm talking about feeding ducks bread, but did you know feeding bread to the ducks can render them flightless or even kill them? And it pollutes waterways. The Christchurch community group's trying to get signs put up around rivers and lakes there to warn people against feeding birds bread and is mounting a social media campaign. Here's our reporter Zach Fleming with more.
Delicious doesn't equal nutritious. Sugar and fast foods, case in point. And so it is for ducks and other birds. We shouldn't be feeding them bread. Do you guys like bread? Is that a no? Dr. Pauline Howard, a wildlife vet with the South Island Wildlife Hospital, says it can render them flightless.
It causes abnormalities in their wing growth so that the bones actually develop incorrectly and the joints dislocate and they get this condition called angel wings. It's not particularly treatable once they get it.
So once they get it, they will never be able to fly again?
That's right.
Add to that, they pollute water when they eat bread because it bulks up their faeces. So the Opawaho Heathcote River Network in Christchurch has mounted a campaign to get signs put up around the city's waterways. People along the Avon River today were supportive, and some people were already aware feeding the ducks bread is bad.
I'm afraid we still did it, because it's fun.
Not since I found out that I gave them gyp and messed up the rivers. But I often have a bag of cooked rice with me. I think that's okay.
Christchurch City Councillor for the Heathcote ward, Sarah Templeton, says the idea hasn't come before the City Council yet, but she says more education is needed.
Some really good education for people is a really good idea, and I think signs will help with that. It's really important that we do what's best for both the river health and the ducks.
And it's not just Christchurch, it's a problem up and down the country. Auckland Council's Community Parks Manager Martin van Jaarsveld says feeding birds bread can give them botulism and kill them.
Bread promotes the growth of the bacteria, and if you look at the way that botulism is mostly spread from one bird to the other bird, it's mainly due to the maggots that is generated by dead birds. So you create this vicious cycle.
In Auckland's Western Springs Park today, we found several people feeding ducks and geese bread, despite there being signs saying not to. Did you know that feeding ducks and geese bread can kill them?
No, I didn't.
How does it make you feel now?
I'm pretty stoked. Yeah, wow.
Some people we caught knew they were hurting the ducks, but continued to do it anyway. They refused to be interviewed. Dr. Howard says people should avoid feeding ducks at all, but if they really want to, feed them seeds and grains. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Coming up to 6 o'clock, after 6, we're going to return to the subject of lead in petrol and having it taken out. One of the lead global campaigners against lead in petrol was a New Zealander, Des Wilson, or an expat New Zealander, a Brit really. We talked to him after 6. And back to Marsden Point, Chris says he worked there during the expansion in the 80s, was an electrician on the construction, and remember one day being near a hole on the coastal side of the site from which you could smell the lead fumes coming out of the ground. That email coming in at 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A jury at the High Court in Christchurch has found a man guilty of murdering and assaulting a 15-month-old baby boy. Troy Taylor, who's 23, was on trial accused of assaulting and murdering Ihaka Stokes at his Christchurch home in 2015. Taylor was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. Today, a jury made up of 6 women and 6 men deliberated for about 4 hours before delivering their verdict, finding Taylor guilty on both charges. Taylor, who looked shocked when the verdict was read, was remanded in custody for sentencing until June the 9th. The Dunedin City Council has taken a $20 million contract to run the city's landfill off one of its own companies and handed it to a private contractor. The troubled infrastructure company Delta has held the contract for the Green Island landfill since 2003. The council says it was awarded an 8-year contract worth $20.6 million to the private firm Waste Management Limited. Delta staff have been briefed this afternoon, but it's not known how many jobs will be lost. The council says the new contract will save $500,000, but was decided on quality of service as well as price. Airlines expect to have most passengers whose flights were delayed by fog in Wellington cleared by later this evening. They've been putting on extra flights where possible. The troubles left stranded passengers sleeping on a hard terminal floor at Wellington Airport last night after both major airlines made clear accommodation was not on offer. And the Mayor of Wellington, Justin Lester, ruled out city welfare centres as well.
Our welfare centres are there for situations of emergency. It's not an emergency when you've only had fog that's been there for a day. It's a situation that's unfortunate. No one wants to be in that position, of course, but at the same time we've got to make sure that there's a threshold that's crossed.
Justin Lester, some lucky passengers were helped when small Air New Zealand planes landed at Kapiti Coast Airport instead of Wellington, and Palmerston North also took some of the pressure. Police are searching for a man who grabbed a teenage boy and pulled him into his car on Auckland's North Shore. Police say the man is in his 60s with a dragon tattoo on his face. Detective Senior Sergeant James Bothamley of North Shore Police says the 14-year-old was walking along Lancaster Road in Beach Haven at around 8 o'clock yesterday morning when he was grabbed. After being forced into the man's car, he was able to fight him off and run away. The boy is thought to have suffered several seizures during the attack. Police want to talk to anyone who saw a teenage boy in uniform walking along the road and looking unwell, and who may have stopped to help. Petrol sludge containing a highly toxic form of lead, long banned from petrol in New Zealand, may have been dumped near the coast at Marsden Point. 2 former workers at Marsden Point near Whangarei say the alkyl lead additives were imported as liquids and added to petrol by workers at the refinery. They believe they were exposed to unnecessary risk during the process, and the extent of the danger was withheld from them. Brian Tobin told Checkpoint he remembered regularly working with 190-litre drums of the sludge.
Even though you had an air mask on, you could smell it. And we just had plain white overalls, and if they were available, a pair of underpants to wear underneath them and a sweatshirt in the winter.
Brian Tobin. The Northland Regional Council says the dumping may have happened, but it did not test for alkyl leads.
A rare case of potentially fatal diphtheria has been detected in Canterbury. The disease was found in a finger wound on a 48-year-old person who returned to Christchurch last year following a holiday in Samoa. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
The Institute of Environmental Science and Research says soon after they returned, the person noticed their right middle finger was swollen. A swab of the finger wound revealed diphtheria of the skin after the person had been admitted to hospital for unrelated congestive heart failure. Because the disease can spread to the throat and bloodstream, the patient was given antibiotics and was cleared. 9 patients in the same room and staff were also given antibiotics and none became infected. Immunisation in childhood and at 45 and 65 mean diphtheria is rare in New Zealand. 4 cases of skin diphtheria were diagnosed in 2014 and 2015 from infections picked up overseas. This is Karen Brown.
13 people have been killed in the United States after a bus collided head-on with a utility truck west of San Antonio in southern Texas. Police say the lone survivor from the bus and the driver of the ute are being treated in hospital. It's 6:05. To sport, after 3 weeks of practice on the Hauraki Gulf, Team New Zealand have packed up their boat and are preparing to set sail for Bermuda in the America's Cup. Their main opponents, such as America's Cup holders Oracle, have been in Bermuda practicing. Team New Zealand skipper Glenn Ashby says their rivals have been making big gains in Bermuda, but he's confident they'll be able to match them.
Only time will tell whether we've done our homework well enough here in New Zealand to be able to mix it up with those guys over there. But from all indications at the moment, I think we've been on par at least.
Glenn Ashby, the team leaves for Bermuda in just over a week. The Cup qualifiers will begin on May the 27th. After a busy summer schedule, the New Zealand cricket coach Mike Hesson has declared himself more than satisfied with how the Black Caps are performing. Despite the frustrating finish to the summer, the Black Caps were on course to win their first test over South Africa in more than a decade before being denied by the weather. He says there's been plenty of success.
We've never won more than 3 test matches in a home summer. We won 4 test matches this summer. We beat Pakistan, who were number 1. We obviously had a really nice middle of the summer. We won the Chapel Hadley. We also challenged probably one of the best touring sides in terms of a test team with South Africa, and I think we matched them.
Mike Hesson. The Australian Players Association has launched an online petition in a bid to help keep 5 Australian teams in Super Rugby. It's believed SANZAAR will cut 1 Australian and 2 South African sides from the competition next year. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Robert Sikoriak talks about his new graphic novel based on the terms and conditions for Apple's iTunes app, all 29,000 words worth. Now, is that postmodern or what? Our Changing World explores the science of listening, and Morgan Davey makes his debut as our new cultural ambassador for board games. You know, Monopoly, Cluedo, Backgammon. It's another roll of the dice on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland mainly fine today, cloudy periods and isolated showers tomorrow. Auckland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, however long fine breaks during the afternoons and evenings. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and isolated showers, clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. Manawatu to Wellington, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle tomorrow, mostly about the Tararua Range. Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine but cloudy about the Kaikoura coast. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle developing this evening. Fiordland, rain developing later today with heavy falls in the south. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly fine today apart from low cloud or fog about coastal Otago and Canterbury. Scattered rain for Southland tonight, becoming cloudy everywhere tomorrow and scattered rain spreading to Otago. And the Chatham Islands overcast with occasional drizzle and fog. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. There was shock on the face of Troy Taylor when a jury found him guilty of murder an hour and a bit ago. The 23-year-old was found guilty of the murder and assault of toddler Ihaka Stokes at their Christchurch home in 2015. Taylor was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. Our reporter Maya Burry was in the High Court in Christchurch and she joins us now live. Hi again, Maya. How did the court react?
Yeah, John, you're right in saying when Troy Taylor looked shocked as he stood in the dock as the jury read this verdict, finding him guilty of murder and assaulting Ihaka Stokes, Michaela Stokes' son. And a short time ago outside court, Cameron Allen, who was the boy's biological father, when he was asked for comment on the verdict, he said, "Good job." But that was about all the reaction we got out of the people involved in this case. Taylor's defence lawyer didn't say anything as he left court, obviously not the outcome they wanted.
No. Did Ihaka's mother, Michaela, react afterwards?
No, she looked very sombre as she left court, obviously in shock. But the jury took 4 hours to reach their decision, and that's after hearing 8 days of evidence in this trial. A whole lot of evidence was put before the jury. They heard Mr. Taylor accuse Ms. Stokes of being the one who was responsible for Ihaka's death. But obviously today the jury decided that it was in fact Troy Taylor who had murdered Ihaka Stokes.
Yes, they were certainly, the defence team were certainly trying to just sow some doubt there in the jury's mind. What did the defence team say about it afterwards?
They didn't have much to say at all, John. Obviously, their whole case was stacked around pointing the finger towards Ms. Stokes. They alleged that she was the one who was alone in the house for 3.5 hours on the day Ihaka died with the boy. That they pointed the finger at her, but today the jury decided they weren't convinced, and that it was in fact Troy Taylor who was responsible for the boy's death.
Maya Barry, who was at the High Court in Christchurch and was there when those 2 guilty verdicts were delivered. Thank you so much, Maya. It's 6:10 on Checkpoint. At the beginning of the program tonight, we looked at the addition of highly toxic alkyl leads into the nation's petrol at Marsden Point. This is back in the 60s and 70s. Lead was banned from New Zealand petrol in 1996. 2 former workers at the refinery told us imported leads were added to the petrol there and that they had no idea of the extent of the risk involved. One of them, Brian Arndt, told me the workers did that, how they did it, and what's happened to him since.
We removed an outer cap by we placed the drum on a roller bed, turned the drum so the cap was uppermost, removed the cap and removed an internal plug, and then you were within 60 centimetres of the surface of the lead inside the drum.
So you had taken the cap off and the drum was open to you at that point. Could you smell the lead?
Yes, you could. Even though you had an air mask on, you could smell it. And we just had plain white overalls, and if they were available, a pair of underpants to wear underneath them and a sweatshirt in the winter. We were given no induction training outlining the risks or procedures, or in the case of spillage, what to do. There was no training given with this product. We were not aware of any dangers. In the 1980s, I started getting squamous carcinomas, which is now positively attributed to the toxic effect of tetraethyl lead in particular passing through the skin. I also then, in the late 80s, became aware of a heartache or ache around my heart and the left lung, and there was a large tumour removed from my left lung. In 2009, I was diagnosed with a oddball tumour in my right breast. I had a complete mastectomy. And then early 2012, I had radical radiation and hormonal treatment on my prostate. I had a tumour that was 57 millimetres big. I then discovered a tumour growing in my left breast, and that was removed. In 2013, my oncologist sat down with me and said a peer review had been done by his colleagues. They couldn't figure out why I had all these cancers and problems. I ran through my work history of life, and when I got to working at the refinery, he said, no, not hydrocarbon, different cancer. When I said tetraethyl lead, he said, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me.
Brian Arndt, the workers we spoke to, both who worked there in the 60s and 70s, told Checkpoint sludge containing the toxic leads was dumped into sand near the coastline beside Marsden Point. The Northland Regional Council and the refinery say lead levels are below national standards in the area, but the last test they'd been able to confirm to Checkpoint was in 1995. All of this has arisen in the week the Dunedin study has reported a link between exposure to lead and lower IQs in children. That risk was central to the campaign to ban lead from petrol. It was banned from petrol in New Zealand in 1996 and in many countries earlier than that. A New Zealand-born Brit, Des Wilson, was a key figure in the campaign to have lead banned, widely credited with having a very influential role in that happening. He told me from England he was alerted to the risk from lead in petrol fumes by a scientist who persuaded him to take it seriously.
And once we started looking into it, we found that there were actually a whole series of studies around the world, but particularly in America, that confirmed that children could have their brains affected, their intelligence and their behaviour affected at a far lower level of exposure than anyone had realised. And when you realise that lead is a neurotoxin, that is to say a brain poison in effect, there is no more effective way of reaching every child in the country than spraying it out of car exhausts. And that's what we were doing. Cars were driving up and down streets and roads emitting a brain poison that affected children.
And at first, when you began campaigning to get the lead out of petrol, because of the risk to children, for example, what was the response from the people who put the lead in?
The industry, that's to say the lead industry, the lead additive industry, to some extent the car manufacturers and to some extent the petroleum companies, all kind of ganged up. And their basic line was that really we were just a bunch of nutters. We were exaggerating the problem massively, and the government supported them. And they did their best to position us as just irresponsible and exaggerating the problem. But unfortunately for them, every piece of evidence that came down supported us and not them. And in the end, the government simply couldn't withstand the pressure.
Sometime after you achieved success with your campaign in the UK and Europe, and I think Japan was first and so on, you came to New Zealand to campaign here. Do you remember the response in New Zealand?
So I arrived at a weekend and we began the campaign on a Monday, and on the Tuesday the Minister of Energy, Mr. Bob Tizard, recorded a television interview in which he described me as a fool. And basically what he said was, and it was an incredible remark, he said, what he's talking about is children in Britain. But until he can convince me that children in New Zealand are affected by lead and petrol, I don't intend to act. And to which my reply was, well, they were taking it out of petrol in America, Australia, Japan, the whole of Europe. What was it about New Zealand children that made them the only children in the world that were not affected by lead pollution? It was ridiculous. And 3 days later, he was forced by his own government to announce that they were going to take lead out of petrol.
I wonder if we can return to the reaction of the people who were making the lead additives, who earned their livelihood by producing this. One person I've spoken to said they were as protective and as defensive as big tobacco. Now that's pretty strong. Am I going too far there?
No, you're not. I mean, the main company in the UK, which in fact made lead additives that sold right across the world, that company was called Associated Octal, and it employed huge lobbying firms, paid scientists, took scientists on their staff to argue their case. They called us everything under the sun. In fact, I found that they had found a way of finding out wherever I was going around the country, appearing on radio programs, and their PR man would literally turn up on the doorstep of the radio program the day I was there in order to try and counterbalance our case. They did everything they could. Just as the tobacco companies, even though there were over 150,000 studies that show that smoking is bad for health, still refused to acknowledge it. Well, it's the same with the lead additive people. Don't forget, this was their whole business was at stake, and they they had two choices: either to admit that their product was a threat to the health of children, and basically find another way of making money, or they had to try and rubbish us. And of course they tried to rubbish us. I mean, that's the game.
Des Wilson, quite a remarkable person, Des Wilson. Well, not quite a remarkable person, a truly admirable one. Waitaki Boys High School boy, but moved to the UK, I think, when he was about 19 and has been there ever since. Really influential figure in British politics. And speaking of which, it was a fairly heavy-handed old segue, and one of the most significant steps by a British leader since World War II, Prime Minister Theresa May has formally begun the United Kingdom's divorce from the European Union. Mrs May notified EU Council President Donald Tusk in a hand-delivered letter that Britain would quit the club it joined back in 1973. Britain now has 2 years to negotiate the terms of the divorce before it comes into effect. The BBC's Rob Watson takes a look back at 44 years of, well, marriage.
If we are to form the United States of Europe, or whatever name it may take, we must begin now.
As Britain prepares to leave the EU, there is a touch of irony in remembering it was perhaps the country's greatest Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who had suggested the idea in the first place.
In Strasbourg, it was French protocol which struck the note for Mr. Heath's welcome with an ornate flourish. They wrote Beethoven's Ode to Joy above his name, a warm prelude to the symbolic signatures under his hand, which have now paved the way for Britain to enter Europe.
But it was to take Britain 16 years to join, with traditional concerns about sovereignty delaying until 1973, the moment the country's only ever truly Europhile Prime Minister Ted Heath signed the treaty ending centuries of British isolation.
Thus, this ceremony today marks an end and also a beginning. An end to divisions which have stricken Europe for centuries.
But Heath was wrong. It was not the end to divisions in Europe or in Britain. All along, sovereignty was a problem. The once pro-European Margaret Thatcher reacted angrily to a push in the early 1980s for a more federal Europe.
Mr. Delors said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community, he wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no.
With its very different history, Britain never felt the same emotional attachment to the EU as other member states, who saw and still see in its creation the end to years of war and conflict on the continent. And despite Britain opting out of the single currency and border-free travel arrangements, that still wasn't enough to satisfy the strong streak of Euroscepticism in the Conservative Party, ultimately leading to David Cameron feeling membership would have to be put to the people.
On Monday, I will commence the process set out under our Referendum Act, and I will go to Parliament and propose that the British people decide our future in Europe. The choice is in your hands, but my recommendation is clear. I believe that Britain will be safer, stronger, and better off in a reformed European Union.
But 52% of the people were to ignore his advice, making Mr. Cameron and Britain's membership of the EU history.
That report from the BBC. Fascinating time. Samsung has unveiled its latest smartphone and is pinning its hopes on it for a market recovery. Remember, the Galaxy S8 is the first new premium phone since the exploding battery Note 7 scandal, which led to a total recall and saw Samsung lose serious market share to Apple. The new Galaxy won't go on sale till April 21st, but the BBC's technology correspondent Zoe Kleinman has just got her hands on one.
The long-awaited Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus from Samsung. A bigger, thinner screen, a hidden home button, and they've even got their own virtual assistant, Bixby.
Bixby can also use the phone's camera as a pair of eyes.
OK, can you tell me more about this wine?
Here are the wine search results.
It's telling how much it costs.
Samsung calls the S8 an art form, but it's still a pretty familiar sight. So what else is new? The fingerprint button has moved to the back, but there's also now facial recognition screen unlocking and improved split screen. Unlike Apple, Samsung is sticking with the traditional headphone jack. It can also dock with a monitor or TV if you still need a bigger screen. But after the disaster of the Note 7's exploding batteries, there's no attempt at extra battery power.
With the Note 7, we took a lot of lessons on the battery. So and we have implemented new types of control, new quality insurance processes that we are, of course, implementing in the production of the S8 and the S8 Plus.
It's 61 with lots of sunshine today.
It's perhaps typical of Samsung's newly cautious approach that Bixby only speaks US English and Korean for now.
That report from Zoe Kleiman at the BBC, 6:24. A group is planning to reinstate a cable car line in Dunedin, and it's one step closer to recreating history. The Dunedin Heritage Light Rail Trust is working on the $15 million plan, which would see the Mornington cable car line up and down High Street re-established after more than 60 years. This week, the Trust filed a resource consent application for the first stage of the project, which will see a temporary cable car museum built to house 3 restored cable cars. The Trust spokesperson met our reporter Ian Telfer at Mornington Park and told him it's an exciting first step.
Well, I can actually see it going down into High Street, and boy, will it be a tourist attraction. There's no doubting that.
So it'll be a working, is it a recreation, is it for tourism, or is it a real thing?
Well, it'll be an identical to what it used to be back in 1957. It's running down exactly the same line as where it was before. Where we're standing underneath here would have been the tracks if they'd left them there. So we're standing on the tracks of the old route, and it's going down exactly the same as the old route used to be. It's going to wind up at the same place in the exchange where the old route was, and coming back up again. So it's going to be just like the old route, but it's now in the 2020.
And is it like a tram or different?
Well, the difference between a tram and a cable car is there's no motors in a cable car. It's all controlled by a rope underground. And you hook onto it, take yourself down to where you want to go, unhook when you want to stop, and then hook back on again, and away you go.
Yeah. And this is pretty rare around the world.
It's the only one outside of San Francisco.
So there's San Francisco's famous one, and there's nothing else?
Nothing else. We were the second, when it was built in 1883, we were the second one after San Francisco anyway. And we were the only ones in the world then that had what they called a pull curve, which took cable cars around corners. San Francisco never did. They had to go up to a corner, T intersection, put another cable car going the other way. And the designer of that was a Dunedin man.
But this was all ripped out 60 years ago. Why do you want to recreate it?
Well, I just see it something as a real touristy type of thing, and I think it'd be some fun to ride on. I was born in Christchurch, so I've never seen the cable car until 3 years ago. And I've been on this group for 10 years. And it's just, I can just see it as being a real great thing. And it can be a bus route, of course, as well.
But very expensive project, like we're talking about $15 million?
Yeah, but it's that fast. There's not much money at all. Talk $182 million for the stadium.
Is it doable?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The people I've been talking to that will probably come in nearer the thing will be talking into their hundreds of thousands of dollar donations. But they won't come in at this stage, though.
Yeah, but for now, you're starting small.
Yep. Well, what we're trying to do, we're trying to take it off paper and put it onto tracks. So everything we've been showing so far up until now has been all paperwork. What we can do now with these cable cars, we can actually push them out and say, that's what we're talking about, because they can actually see them, they can touch them, where they couldn't before.
So it makes it real for people once you get this temporary building?
Yep, that's exactly what we're aiming for, at this point.
Wow. And that's stage 1, and then what happens?
Well, then stage 1 is linked with stage 2, which means that when we raise the funds, the stage 1 is going to try and create the funds for stage 2, and then stage 2 will take over the site where we are now. It's a 2-storey building, cable car house completely in there, which all the cable cars will be in, all the machinery, all the staff will be working down underneath. Up top will be a cafe, a museum, you name it, it'll be up there.
And that'll be the base for the new cable car?
Cable car, yeah. Because the other one we can't use anymore because it's now turned into something else.
And from there, what, just the tracks?
Well, it's all downhill, isn't it, from there, down to the bottom. And then it's going to be a tourist attraction that they won't even believe how good it's going to be, really.
Neville, some people think this is just a pipe dream, eh? Are you confident?
Well, it could be considered a pipe dream, but no, I've got 4 people on my trust, and one of them lived here on High Street, so he knows all about cable cars. The other one, his father used to be a conductor on here, and he's also about cable cars. The third man is the man who's restoring all our cable cars, so they're not pipe dreams for them. So, and I'm just the chairperson or spokesperson on that.
Well, if all goes well, how far is this away?
This building here, hopefully, if we get the planning consent in the next 10 or so days, which is the 20-day period, then we will be starting on the very next day.
Neville Jemmett talking to Ian Telfer at Mornington Park. Go Neville, go Dunedin. What a beautiful day it looked like down there. Finally tonight, a treat for the chimps at Wellington Zoo. We played this earlier, but we're just going to rerun it. This is Wellington Zoo's primate team leader, Harmony Wallace, telling our reporter Zach Fleming about a little trampoline that was put into the chimps enclosure, and it is a joy if you're able to watch it.
When it first got put in there, the youngest chimp we've got here, Kitway, he's 2. He is the one in the video. He obviously found it pretty interesting and pretty playful, and for him a new experience. They're used to the hammocks and stuff that they can jump on, but this felt quite different and looked different. So for him it was a cool, fun thing to be able to play with. And then our alpha male, Alexi, is the bigger one in the video, along with Kitway's mum. And being the alpha, he wanted to make sure that Kitway was going to stay nice and safe, and he's also really playful, so he saw that Kitway was enjoying it and getting a lot of play out of it, and so he wanted to go and take part as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of ironic that a 2-year-old had a go before the alpha male. The smaller they are, I guess, kind of the less fear they have almost, as long as mum feels it safe, and they know that, also we're not going to put anything in there that is really unsafe for them, so they know that it's a safe environment for them.
Pretty cute pictures are on our Facebook page and the Zoo's Facebook page at all, as of course. Nice way to end tonight. We'll see you tomorrow at 5, we hope.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A Christchurch jury has found Troy Taylor guilty of murdering and assaulting 15-month-old Ihaka Stokes in 2015 while living with the child's mother. Police are searching for a man with a dragon tattoo on his face who tried to abduct a teenage boy in the Auckland suburb of Beach Haven yesterday. Most airline passengers delayed in Wellington by fog are expected to be on their way by later this evening. 2 former workers at Marsden Point Refinery believe petrol sludge containing a highly toxic form of lead was dumped near the Whangarei coast. A federal judge in the American state of Hawaii has extended the suspension of the President Donald Trump's travel ban for an indefinite time. A woman has launched an online petition calling for a live-in pet store to be closed after claiming it's abusing animals. And bags of money fell out of an armoured security